So let's talk about rhyming. It's not hard to figure out what words we can match together, like fire and hire, or ferret and merit. But as words get longer, how do we know what parts are relevant? We usually need more than a single bit of noise, like one consonant or vowel, but less than a whole word. We need to find the middle ground for speech sounds. And we've got a few syllables to share with you about what that looks like. I'm Moti Lieberman, and this is the Ling Space.
Welcome to the Ling Space.
So the sounds that make up our speech don't just float around untethered like little balloons inside our words. Every spoken language takes consonants and vowels and ties them together into bundles. These are bigger than the sounds themselves, but not necessarily as big as the whole word, and we call them syllables. Once we have our sounds organized into syllables, then we're ready to work up to building words. But what exactly makes a syllable? The first and most important part that every syllable needs is a core, a sound that holds the whole thing together. In this sense, a syllable is just like an atom because the sound that centers everything else is known as the nucleus. The nucleus is the strongest and loudest thing that a syllable has to offer. And it gives the other sounds something to orbit around and call home. So not just any sound is qualified to be the nucleus of a syllable. It's got to be loud and strong. Some sounds are always allowed to form the nucleus of a syllable across all languages, and those are vowels. Anytime you see a vowel, it gets to take up residence at the heart of a syllable. It doesn't matter what the vowel is. It could be a or e or even If it's a vowel, it's a nucleus. Every vowel ever is a nucleus forever. And that's true even if you have two vowels next to each other with nothing in between, like in naive, or even three vowels next to each other, like in the Japanese word for blue, aoi. But some languages are more flexible with what's allowed in the nucleus. Sometimes you just can't find a vowel, but you still need to make a syllable. In those cases, maybe you can make do with something like or where the air can flow out freely through your nose if you don't have a cold. Or something like ul or where the air isn't really impeded much in escaping your mouth. Languages like English, Czech, and Danish are totally fine with this kind of behavior. Just look at the last syllable in something like battle or mountain. There's no vowel between the t and either the ol or the n. And because there isn't one, you just shrug and put the ol or n into the nucleus of the syllable, then hope that it can handle the job. Which they can. But you can't do this with just any consonant of English. Things with just a little bit of airflow, like f or s, or things with no airflow at all, like t or k, aren't strong enough to shoulder their own syllable. And this is pretty true across languages. The more freely air can escape your body, the more likely the sound will be able to do nucleus work. So vowels are good everywhere. Strong sonorous consonants like ul and n are pretty good in a lot of languages, and weak stopped up consonants like k or t aren't really that good anywhere. But of course, there's more to a syllable than what goes in the middle. We also want to deal with the consonant sounds that come before and after the nucleus. Let's start with the ones that come before. These are known as onsets, and they lead up into the nucleus. Languages really like these things. In fact, there are a lot of languages that require an onset in order for a word to be okay to pronounce, like Arabic or Tagalog. In those languages, a string of sounds like iro would be bad as a word because there isn't a consonant at the beginning to serve as the onset. And all languages are fine with having onsets, even if they don't require one at the beginning of every single syllable. You never get a language that doesn't allow onsets at all. So if you have something like toff, then whatever language you're in, that t will be in the onset of the syllable, leading up into the nucleus a. Some languages, like English, French, and German, like onsets so much that they even let more than one consonant appear at the beginning of the syllable. So for a word like snow, both s, n are onset consonants. But all languages use onsets, and all languages allow syllables that consist of one consonant and one vowel. Okay, but what about the consonants that come after vowels at the end of syllables? Those sounds are known as codas, and they have a more complicated relationship with language. Some languages are totally okay with them, and will let you put just about anything in a coda. English is super permissive this way, and so any consonant other than H can show up at the end of a syllable. So if we go back to toff, the f at the end is treated as a coda. Or if you have two consonants at the end, they can both fit into the coda. So that's like the "nd" at the end of something like bend. But other languages don't let you put just anything in the coda. So languages like Japanese only let you put in nasal consonants like and And the only codas Mandarin will let you have are and sometimes So Japanese could deal with a syllable like wan, where the n is allowed to go in the coda, but it couldn't deal with a word like what we saw before, tough. And some languages like Hawaiian don't allow you to have any codas at all. For them, consonants can only go into onset. So why are codas worse than onsets? Linguists have come up with a few different explanations, but here's a good one. Remember, vowels are the strongest and loudest sounds. That's why they get put in the nucleus. It turns out it's easier for us to tell sounds apart when they're leading into the nucleus than leaving it. The acoustic information is just easier to get at, and their influence on the shape of the vowel in the middle is greater. So we like onsets more than codas, and more consonants will line up to get into club onset than into club coda. That means that when we're in the middle of a word and we have a consonant between two vowels, as long as it's a consonant that can get into club onset, it's going to want to go there and not be a coda. Think about a set of sounds like pabu. Now, we should have a choice here. We could take that b and put it in the onset of syllable 2, like pabu, or we could stick it in the coda of syllable 1, like pabu. But since onsets are better than codas, and since b has a club onset membership card for English, we go with option 1 every time, where the b goes into the second syllable. We only get codas in the middle of the word when the combination can't go together into the onset. So let's consider a string like tenzin. The n at the end has to go into the coda. There's nowhere else for it to go. But let's look at those two consonants in the middle, n and z. Z will go straight into the onset, because it can, and it's first in line. But what about n? Well, we can't really have n's at the beginning of a syllable in English. And we can sense this because we can't find any English words that begin with n's, like nzang or anything. It's not that we can't pronounce it, we just don't allow it. So that means that n is going to have to give up and just go to club coda instead. It gets put in the coda of the first syllable, and we end up with tan and zin. So there's one last thing for us to talk about regarding syllables, and it's the question we started off with. How do we make rhymes? Like, how do we know what part of the syllable is important for that? If we think about it, we can see it's the last part. It's the in kora, or the in bolin. The fact that that in part is the same in tenzin and bolin is what lets us know those two words rhyme. And now we know that's the nucleus and the coda. So we actually group these together in the syllable structure. The nucleus and the coda together form what's called the rhyme. And we mark those off separately from the onset in our little tree. If the rhymes rhyme, then the words rhyme. And that shows us just how poetic phonology can be. So we've reached the end of the Ling Space for this week. If you bundled all my consonants and vowels together, you learned that we group sounds into syllables when we talk, that every syllable has a nucleus, which is usually a vowel, that's the strongest part, that languages like onsets, which are the consonants that come before nuclei, but are iffier on codas, the ones that come after them, and that the rhyme, the combination of nucleus and coda, is what we care about for rhyming. The Ling Space is produced by me, Moti Lieberman. It's directed by Adèle-Élise Prévost, and it's written by both of us. Our production assistant is Georges Coulombe, our music and sound design is by Shane Turner, and our graphics team is Atelier Muse. We're down in the comments below, or you can take the discussion back over to our website where we have some extra material on this topic. Check us out on Tumblr, Twitter, and Facebook, and if you want to keep expanding your own personal Ling Space, please subscribe. And we'll see you next Wednesday. Mikita mukeng tutuki.